Tom Pelissero joining us. Very busy time for him with the trade deadline tomorrow. Good to see you, Tommy P. How are you?
Good to see you, Rich. What's up to my boys in the studio?
There we go.
Sound like he's
finally
giving the
Tommy
people what they
No
want.
need to send you a video during the
Good
interview.
to see you, baby.
Yeah, now you could just leave him alone.
I won't, though. I
Well,
won't.
Dude, his phone is buzzing anyway, I'm sure.
I'm not going to bother you with A.J. Brown updates yet. Okay, Tom?
It sounds like there's optimism about A.J. Brown. He is having tests. Is having tests today on the knee. Sounds like a sprain, but they'll gather more information throughout
Thank
the
you.
day.
Good looking
you feel
out.
better now?
I feel great. Good looking out.
Tom, why did the Saints fire Dennis Allen, in your estimation? Tom?
There were a lot of things pointing toward this potentially happening, whether you're talking about a 7-game losing streak, the fact that Dennis Allen going back to his Raider days since 2012, all the coaches in that time who have coached at least 75 games, Dennis Allen had the worst winning percentage of any of them. You had players, the respected guys like Cam Jordan coming out on social media and being like, wow, we lost to the Panthers. You had Michael Thomas going off on social media yesterday about why they fired all the coaches to protect the quarterback in Derek Carr, who Dennis Allen obviously was there and was part of the decision to bring him in and give him guaranteed money that would make sure that Carr was their quarterback for a couple of years here. I thought that it was interesting in the statement that the Saints put out that Mickey Loomis, I don't remember another statement like that from a GM in the firing of a coach who basically said, hey, Dennis Allen's a great coach and we had a ton of injuries and it's not his fault and he didn't make excuses. There was no but it was the right time. It was Mickey Loomis basically being like, this isn't on Dennis Allen, which all brings you to kind of the reality of the situation here, which was when you're on this type of a skid, when you were always going to be compared to Sean Payton, when the fans are frustrated, when you're falling short late in these games. Remember, this is a team that made a run at the end of last season and probably saved Dennis Allen's job at that time. Gail Benson, who really had no track record of making substantial changes because she took over for the late Tom Benson, and the only change that they had made there was when Sean Payton walked away and they hired a guy who was already in the building. There was an unknown of exactly how they would handle this, but anytime you're on that type of losing streak, you're in the third year, you're probably going to be on the chopping block. I thought, going into the season, he'd at least get the year. But obviously, with the spot that they're in, they're looking for some type of a spark just to make sure that the fans aren't completely looking elsewhere.
Yeah,
and the final 2 months of the season.
Right, and usually when a coach gets fired mid-season, it's because of an embarrassing loss, and obviously yesterday would be categorized as such, but none more embarrassing than a nationally televised curb stomping at the hands of Sean Payton when he returned, and it was Drew Brees' night. And it was just an absolute awful evening there. So the question is, you even mentioned it, I'll ask it on behalf of Saints fans, what about an entire house clean? What about everybody goes there? Tom, what are you hearing on that front?
Mickey Loomis is one of the longest tenured executives in the entire NFL. I mean, he was running the NBA team that the Bensons owned as the GM there as well. Like, he's on a different program than everybody else. He's probably closer to an owner than he is to a general manager. You rule nothing out, but, to the extent of, all of a sudden you're going to have different voices involved here and this is going to be a tear down. I haven't gotten that sense. I don't get the sense that this is going to be a fire sale, give up on the season. The stuff about the injuries is legit. I mean, Derek Carr missed, 3 starts because of his oblique injury. They've been brutalized at the wide receiver position. Chris Olave, who that's what Michael Thomas was going off about, was basically Derek Carr throwing him hospital balls and him continuing to take the type of hits that send him literally to the hospital. Rashid Shaheed being out. All those things are factors here, but they've got an old, expensive team, Rich. This is one that was built very much to try to win right now. And they did. Again, they finished strong last season. They actually, speaking of embarrassing losses, you remember it was the Saints who were playing the Falcons in the final week of last season when Jameis audibles to hand the ball off to Jamal Williams and get him a touchdown late in the game. And Arthur Smith gets mad and confronts Dennis Allen about it after the game. And Arthur Smith was fired a few hours after that. These are exactly those types of those moments that even though, it's not just based upon the loss to the Panthers, it's kind of all those things combined, it's the acknowledgement that, the Saints were probably moving on. Does that include Mickey Loomis? Again, we don't really have signs that pointing that direction. Mickey Loomis was very close with Tom Benson. The feeling within the league has always been that Mickey is going to call his shot on retiring and walking away from the team. Could that happen this year? Could that happen a couple of years from now? Anything's possible at this stage, but in terms of Mickey Loomis being fired, I haven't gotten that sense at this point.
So Darren Rizzi, the special teams coach, is now the interim head coach. Are the Saints now officially sellers in the next 24 hours? Who would be available from their team, do you think? Tom?
Marshawn Lattimore is the key one that they've gotten calls about. He's probably the most valuable piece that they have. There was an ongoing issue of he's probably going to need a new contract after this season. I thought maybe he was going to get traded back in training camp. That's the logical guy. But beyond that, again, I don't get the sense in talking to people that this is all of a sudden, hey, we're gonna trade all these older parts on the team. I mean, you've got guys like Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, who they have continued to do deals with. You just did a new deal with Alvin Kamara. A lot of these guys are not even tradable, Rich. And I know that the Saints are used to eating dead money on the salary cap, but when you just paid guys, it becomes that much more punitive to then move on from them. Are there other potential guys who could be traded for? I'm sure that there are on the team, but they also have so many injuries that a lot of the guys who teams otherwise might be targeting, whether that's offensive linemen, whether it's some of the, potentially even the wide receivers, a lot of those guys are not on the field right now, and you can't trade a guy who's not available.
So again, Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. It's just so difficult having conversations like this because you're treating families, livelihoods, like they're just commodities, and like you're benching somebody, or you're just talking about a win or a loss, and you're talking about jobs here. So that said, though, that's two guys that have gotten fired midseason. Robert Saleh with the Jets, and now you've got Dennis Allen with the Saints. Are there any other teams that are an embarrassing loss or two away from doing the same thing, do you think, right now, Tom?
I said this to some people as I was, talking with various people within the league last night. Like, all the teams that were kind of on that precipice of, all right, what are they going to do? They basically all lost yesterday. I mean, the Saints, the Raiders, who fired Luke Getsy late last night, they were certainly, in that spot. Right now, Antonio Pierce is getting to remodel his own coaching staff, so there's nothing, pressing. He's in his first year. But certainly the Raiders are hoping and expecting that they're going to perform better than they have to this point in the season. Obviously, Jacksonville, we've been talking about that one throughout. Doug Peterson and everybody else knows that, they've got to win here down the stretch. And they nearly, pulled it off yesterday against the Eagles, against all odds. And there's a controversial call on that Saquon fumble that gets returned for a touchdown, and on a play where I'd put Trayvon Walker's touchdown return there, Rich, like top 10 athletic feats that I've seen by a defensive player running the ball back. I mean, that was like, play that guy at tight end or something. You may be able to have some success. But, the Jaguars are certainly on that list. There's going to continue to be speculation about Mike McCarthy in Dallas, but Jerry Jones, said it last night that, he likes what he sees from Mike. He knows what a good coach he is. He's good with him. If they don't, turn this around and make the playoffs, I think everybody involved, including Mike, would know, he's in a contract here. He's a guy who's probably not going to be back in 2025. And by the way, I think that if Mike McCarthy's not back in Dallas, he will be a candidate for other jobs, potentially even the one in New Orleans, a place that he was coaching about 20 years ago and is going to need some type of an offensive upswing. I mean, there's a bunch of them, Rich. We've already, like you said, we've got 2 head coaching openings. We now have an offensive coordinator opening. There's a bunch more teams. I mean, what are there, 9 teams, I think, that have 2 wins right now? They're 2-6 or 2-7. That's a lot of teams that are kind of buried right now. And it'll be interesting to see over these next, 27 hours here, how many trades we get at the deadline, because the competition committee's concern with pushing back the deadline has always been the later you get, the more teams might fire sale. And then you have an inequity competitively in terms of some of the matchups the second half of the season. If there's mass sell-offs in different places, that's going to give people pause about potentially even pushing the trade deadline back another week, which is something the GM advisory committee's been pushing for.
Well, one more on the coaching before we move to the trade deadline. Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. So every year, again, when a couple teams fire a coach seemingly early, other teams do follow suit. because they do want to get a head start on a new coach when they feel like they're going to go do it anyway. And there are some coaches who are really old school that are out there who are like, I'm not talking to you until the job's open. And usually that coach is somebody sitting in the media that places a bunch of pressure on top of this boiling pot. Used to be Bill Cowher until he said, I'm not doing it. It definitely was Sean Payton a couple years ago. Belichick is now that guy. There's no question about it. He's that guy. Is he looming over this process right now, do you think, Tom?
Bill Belichick is definitely one of the names that, every discussion I have, that's one of the first ones that everybody brings up in terms of, what's going to happen and kind of the trickle down to the rest of the cycle. We've had, especially over the last, 7-8 years since Sean McVay came in, this influx of about 2/3 of all hires are first-time head coaches under age 45, most of them from the offensive side of the ball. You've seen, though, some coaches who have different backgrounds who have had, initial success. Dan Quinn's doing a really good job with a Washington roster that, Jaden Daniels is unbelievable, but I don't know that if you looked at that roster, compared it around the league, that you'd say this is a really talented football team overall. But he's led to a cultural shift, and he's drawn on, some of the experiences. Sean Payton seems to be having that type of an effect in Denver, even though you're seeing stops and starts. They certainly got a reality check yesterday against Baltimore. He's a second-time head coach who's drawing on that. I think that the last cycle, last year in particular, was so dominated by the positive reinforcement culture guys. Basically, everybody who got a job, Jim Harbaugh, I would still say is in that category. He's different because he'd done it before and because his there's nobody else like Jim Harbaugh, but a lot of the others were positive reinforcement guys. That's what, Gerard Mayo certainly is. That's what Antonio Pierce is in terms of being, more player-led. Brian Callahan, Dave Canales are all in that tip.
Raheem Morris.
Usually what happens,
as well.
Raheem Morris. Usually what you have then is the swing back to, okay, if all the hiring went this way, now you might have, all right, where's the candidates? Well, they're the guys who might be more of the negative reinforcement culture. Belichick is definitely in that category. Hopefully this is not a trade that's happening right now. I'm going to call you right back.
Okay.
Bill Belichick is just a different type of a guy. Mike Vrabel is certainly in that category as well. Vrabel, who now is part of the coaching staff in Cleveland. If you've seen him in the last few weeks, he's down there working with the offensive line, and he's got a headset. He's another guy who is a really, really good coach, but more of a, there's negative reinforcement aspects to the type of culture that he breeds. Does Pete Carroll still want one more shot? Now, he's a positive guy, but he's an older coach. He's been around the block. Does somebody want to go potentially that direction? Again, if Mike McCarthy is back out there, I think all those veteran, experienced type of coaches are certainly going to be in the mix this year, because this is a really rare. I mean, think about the number of games this group of coaches has won. Why would you not try to talk to a Belichick or a Pete Carroll? Even if you don't think it's a long-term thing, if you feel like you got a roster that's ready to win right now, the Saints are a really veteran roster. I don't know that Bill Belichick wants to move to New Orleans at this point, but, why would you not call those types of guys here? I think it's wide open, Rich. It often is. Ben Johnson certainly is going to be high up on a lot of people's lists here, but every team has their own criteria. And the likes of Belichick, Vrabel, even Carroll, McCarthy, if Mike McCarthy becomes available, those are the guys who I think are going to be of interest to a lot of different people. And you're right, even though the NFL has legislated this process differently now, they've slowed it down. They've basically set up a system where you have to extend your search into late January, if not February. I would think those guys, by being available now, perhaps, let people kind of get going on some of their research a little bit early.
All right, so before I let you go, because, again, you're kind enough to say you were going to call somebody back. And for the radio audience, Tom has looked down at his phone every single time I've been setting him up. You're really an outstanding multitasker, Tom. I appreciate it. What is the what is the trade market looking like right now with me being a little bit fretful that what you say could be dated within 5 minutes from now? But just give it to me. What do you got?
We're live, so we can talk about it right now. 27 hours out from the deadline here. I would say the two key spots to watch are going to be wide receiver and edge rusher. There are a lot of wide receivers who potentially are available. Mike Williams, even though the Jets won last week, that's certainly a name that's going to come up in trade talks here. Do people make another run at guys like Cortland Sutton from the Broncos, who, they certainly have had offers really over the last couple of years here for him? How does Sean Payton feel about that roster at this point? That one would not be cheap. But that's certainly a name to keep in mind. Darius Slayton, who we talked about yesterday on game day morning, he got banged up in the game yesterday. I think he got a concussion check. But that's a name that was potentially going to be moving. And then you got all the edge rushers. Did not sound when I came on the show as if anything was imminent between the Lions and the Browns for Za'Darius Smith. It seemed for like 3 weeks that that's probably going to happen, but it's not actually taken place just yet. There certainly is going to be interest in guys like Bryce Huff, who was one of the Eagles' big free agent signings, played all 6 snaps yesterday after getting his hand apparently banged up in warmups or something. That's a name that I would think is going to get some potential action. Azeez Ojulari is on that spot on that list as well. Edge rusher is a premium position. There's a lot of teams that are going to be in that market. And you look at the number of wide receiver injuries, Rich, always file that away. Obviously, the Steelers have just been looking perpetually for like 8 months now to add one more. I would think they get one, but I think the Texans potentially are going to add a wide receiver here. Teams like San Francisco and Tampa have had injuries at that position. We've already had 4 wide receivers traded, and I'd personally be surprised if we don't have 5 or 6 by the time this thing is done.
Yeah, man. If I'm the Texans, though, I go for shopping in the offensive line market. Is that even available? Is that even possible? Do you think, Tom?
We've seen some moves already. Cam Robinson was a big one there. The Brandon Scherf, who's also, play a lot of games, been a very good player. He's in Jacksonville as well. That's a potential name that people could target here. And then there's also, one of the things that GMs ask right now is just like, who's really selling? In other words, not just who's got 1 or 2 guys available, like who's selling? And there are a bunch of those teams. I mean, the Browns, as long as it's not about Myles Garrett, they're going to listen on practically anything. Tennessee is certainly going to listen. The Raiders, again, they fired Luke Getsy late last night. They fired the quarterbacks coach and the offensive line coach. I mean, they got all kinds of moving parts there. But if you're Las Vegas, you have to be thinking, we need all the ammo we can get to go and get a quarterback in the draft next year, whether we end up with the number 1 pick or the number 10 pick. We got to be prepared. They already traded Devontae Adams. They got a high pick for him. But could you get interest in, let's say, a Jacoby Myers? They do have some offensive linemen. Could they end up trading one of those guys? I don't think that they trade Max Crosby. That would really, really surprise me. It doesn't sound like there's any plans to do that. But if they got to call on Jack Jones, I mean, that's what GMs and pro scouts are doing right now, is figuring out, who exactly is available.
Take that call, Tom. Thanks again for the time, brother. You be well. Great
Thanks,
job,
Rick.
as always. It's Tom Pelissero. Check him out on the Insiders on NFL Plus, NFL Network as well. He's off. Off he goes. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku Channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.